the impetus for writing the open letter that we signed with a number of other open source foundations was simply calling for updated methods for making open source infrastructure more sustainable. Rising costs for infrastructure, rising expectations. We've got increased legislation worldwide, coming out of Europe, for example, the Cyber Resiliency Act, the US software bill of materials requirements and things like that are driving up, the cost of open source infrastructure. And there's been this recurring conversation about open source funding, largely talking about funding the maintainers, that people should do a better job contributing back, paying the maintainers, and that's sort of an old conversation, one that hasn't been really solved yet. But what nobody was talking about was the fact that all of the actual donated infrastructure that keeps the entire, frankly, software development for every industry, because everything is dependent on open source these days, keeping all of that moving forward, nobody's talking about it. We found that 80% of the traffic was coming from less than 1% of the IPs, for example. And this infrastructure is heavily dependent upon a small number of benefactors who are paying the bills. Meanwhile, you've got tens of thousands of other organizations that are essentially free riding, and in many of them putting significantly high load on these systems in ways that they weren't intended for. And we started engaging with organizations. We found a couple of different things. We found that some of the problems were more endemic in the system. It was what we thought were organizations that were intentionally abusing the system, were unknowingly doing it because some of the tools they were using had made choices that made it really hard for them not to abuse it. And in some of the conversations I was having with the people that run other similar registries, they were basically saying the same thing. They were saying, yes, we are struggling with this. We don't know how to continue to curb these costs. Many of them are not-for-profits, and so they have, much tighter zero-sum budgets. And so they're reliant on their membership to pay to sponsor the foundation. But those members aren't signing up to pay for other organizations to continue to abuse the system. They're trying to, for example, fund development of new open source or to solve specific problems, not pay a CDN bill for other, global 100 companies to hammer on. So that was really the impetus behind creating that letter and joining forces with a number of people to put that out there. The response has been good. I think a lot of people are looking for specifics about what happens next, and we were intentionally vague about that because each ecosystem has its own history, technology, and the solutions for how they will balance the costs and make things more sustainable will by definition be different, right? So a lot of the feedback has been like, well, tell us what's next. And what's next is everybody's working now to figure out how to move that forward.